Hello, I'm David Wallace, your host with PV Reporter. This interview is being sponsored by our nonprofit sister organization, MPN Cancer Connection. And today we're talking with fellow PV patient advocate, Diane Rose. We've had a couple discussions and shared some common ideas on living with an MPN. So Diane, tell us about yourself and your experience with MPN.
So I was diagnosed about 15 years ago, initially with essential thrombocythemia. And then after a few years, the numbers started getting a little wacky, and they changed my diagnosis to Polycythemia Vera. So I did the usual watch and wait for a while, then started on the phlebotomies. I then used Pegasus interferon for a couple of years. It really worked well for me. My numbers were where they ought to be. I went off for a couple of years just thought I'd give myself a little break. And actually just earlier this year, the numbers started creeping up again. So I'm back with just the Pegasus after. So that's where I'm at 15 years later.
Okay. So curious about the shift from ET to PV. How long did you have ET, or tell me a little more about that part?
Yeah, my hematocrit and the red blood cell line it was initially just platelets, and it just little by little that just started going up also. So I don't know if it was the fact that I was getting older. It probably took about 5 years before they said, oh yeah, you have PV now. So.
Okay.
Which I guess is not that unusual for it to morph along its way.
So tell me, how did you feel when you first received the news that you had ET?
Well, I was actually really surprised because I hadn't had any particular symptoms or health problems that I recognized. And I had gone in, I had moved to a new town and was trying to establish care with a new primary physician who said, oh, let's go ahead and get some blood work. I hadn't had any done in a while. And it was just routine blood work that my platelet count came back fairly high enough for him to say, this isn't really quite where it ought to be. Come back in a month and let's see what happens then. And when I came back in a month and he repeated the blood work, he says, yeah, this is not right. So I'm gonna send you to a hematologist and let them take a look at it. So I got online and I looked up, and I did not realize at that point that hematologists are oncologists, and I was going to an oncology office. I had a little bit of a freak out at that point.
Yeah,
I'm like, what do you mean? I'd never heard of this. And so it was alarming. And but as I learned about it and started to get care and realized that, oh, okay, it's a chronic thing, probably just something I'm going to deal with for a long time. And I got past some of the scare research, the really old stuff that was out there. I calmed down quite a bit.
It's funny you mentioned that. When I was diagnosed, and I was rather, I guess you could say shocked or shaken a bit. Mm-hmm. And when I was in the emergency room, I remember the physician telling me, back in those days, they called it a blood disorder. They didn't dare use the C word. Yeah. And they told me, well, if you have to have a blood disorder, this is a good one to have. Yeah. I'm thinking, so really? I'm not feeling that well. So anyway, just a little experience there. And I should mention that with September being Blood Cancer Awareness Month, it's really important for the public to know how vital it is to get a blood test during their annual exam. I'll have to admit that I skipped some blood tests along the way. Years before I was diagnosed, And so quite frankly, I had some fear of needles in those early days. And I understand that you had a similar experience. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was the little kid that they had to pin down on, when you went to the doctor's office to get a vaccination or whatever. The one that the parents in the waiting room just kind of cringe because they hear you screeching. So I've never been a big fan of needles. And obviously you quickly have to kind of get over that with when you have an MPN, because they're drawing blood fairly regularly, or they should be checking it. So, and then when it came time to start giving when they said, oh, the Pegasus interferon, and I said, so do I come in for that? Say, oh, no, you're going to give yourself injections. And I kind of went, what? But, I still don't look when they draw blood. I mean, I don't like faint or anything, but I just don't really like the look of that needle going in my arm. And I've gotten pretty used to it. And I'm like, well, pick your arm. And, it's... So I have to say, though, I hadn't had a lot of blood work before. We moved a lot. My husband and I moved a lot. And so we were always with different physicians, and I didn't pay that much attention to it. I'd skip for a few years because it was just it's kind of a pain to start with a new physician and do all of that. So if something had shown up in my blood work before and a doctor hadn't noticed it or hadn't said anything about it, I didn't have those records. That was before we kept them all online and everything. So, but now I'm a big advocate of at the very least, getting your annual blood work, because, not only can they find things like an MPN and then be proactive about it before you actually have a crisis, but there's other things they find in there, like your cholesterol or, your thyroid function, if they check for that. So, you have to be proactive to take care of it before it becomes something that actually on top of an MPN can cause additional trouble yeah.
So many of us have symptoms that can be a problem, from itching, fatigue, bone pain, and other nasties, I like to call them. So have you had any issues along the way that you were able to overcome symptoms?
Well, I do have fatigue. I have some itching, after I get out of the shower. It's not horrible. I can tolerate it for about the 10 minutes and then it goes away. And a little bit of the burning of the feet and the ends of my toes and that sort of thing. I guess probably the thing that bothers me the most are the night sweats that I get. And unfortunately, Pegasus hasn't taken care of relieving those, but it's, goes, I guess, I always say, well, it could be worse. I have talked to other people and it's a lot worse for them.
So has COVID changed any of your doctor visits? I know I've had a couple of telemedicine appointments that went pretty well. So just kind of curious what impact COVID has had with you.
Well, it hasn't really changed my my appointments with my hematologist, because you have to go in and get the blood work anyway. So I've been comfortable enough, and he's been comfortable enough that he said, listen, if you want to I go do the blood work and then I go and see him. And it's only been a couple of times since all of this happened. I'm sort of on an every 3-month rotation right now. But I have done televisits with my primary doctor, and actually it went quite well. So sometimes it's just a matter of talking to someone and saying, listen. And I also rely through the various medical apps. So for example, I knew that I needed to go see a dermatologist for an annual skin check. Something else that I'm a proponent of, especially since I grew up and have lived most of my life in Florida. And so instead, I've gotten to where I'll write an email to my physician and say, listen, it's the time of year I need to go see a dermatologist. Can you get me the referral that I need without having to go into the office? So I take advantage of technology for my own time, and also I guess, to keep that space between, as little interaction with people as possible.
I believe we connected via social media, and I keep an active PB Reporter Facebook page. There's several Facebook groups that I've found quite helpful over the years. These are really active communities of, I like to say, patients helping patients. I found the support system really helpful during my early days with PB when I knew nothing, and I referred to Dr. Google, which we don't even want to go there. That's not a good thing.
Yeah.
I had 5 years to live, and here I am 11
that one.
years.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you have any tips for patients that have never connected with someone else that has the same MPN that might be helpful?
Well, in terms of getting information, I'm a bit of a research nerd. I really like to kind of dig into stuff, and so I do belong to a few Facebook pages that I find you just have to take some of it with a grain of salt, because you have both extremes, I find, and it's just like reviews on Yelp. The same, one person loves something and someone hates it. So you kind of have to find that middle ground. What I found it useful for is not to take necessarily medical advice, but to say, oh, well, they said this, and then I'll go look it up on my own, or go to a site that has maybe some actual medical studies that I can back it up. And so that's kind of one of the things that I do is and some of them, I just, sometimes people get a little nuts out there, and, and you just have to, it's like any news today. You kind of have to look at the source, make the evaluation. Is the source credible? If you're not sure, go get it backed up someplace else before you accept what you see out there.
Exactly. So you made a really good point. It's definitely not to be construed as medical advice or medical, information. So you always should refer to your physician. Although you can certainly get some good tips, but like you mentioned, you do kind of have to weed through.
Yeah, and I've printed once on your Facebook page and your site. Sometimes you have links to medical journal articles, and so that they've been vetted, and I consider them credible information. So I find through you links to information, and then I can take a look at it, and maybe I understand it and maybe I don't. But if it's something that's worthwhile, I'm absolutely okay with printing out the summary and taking it to my physician and saying, what do you think about this? And that helps me make some decisions on what medication I might prefer, or that sort of thing. So I go into, instead of just waiting to be told when I go to the doctor's office, I believe in being proactive, and saying, this is what I found. Is this true? And having my list ready to go so we can get through everything I want to talk about once every 3 or 6 months, or how often I see the hematologist. So, and the other thing is that, if I can mention this here, I find educating yourself and being able to talk about it helps with the non-hematologist, because this is it's a disease that a lot of people don't know about. And so you have to be proactive to protect your health from people who don't know anything about it. And I say that carefully about protecting your health, but I've gone to physicians and they're like, oh, look, your iron, you need to take iron pills. And I'm like, well, no, I really probably shouldn't do that. And let me tell you why. And if you would like to talk to my hematologist, that might be a good conversation. And so, yeah.
You bring up, that's an excellent point. I know that whenever I'm seeing a dermatologist, my dentist, whatever part of practice care team that I'm seeing outside of hematology, I'm doing that kind of educating the physician as well. So I totally agree, and I think it's very important for the patient to do exactly what you said, because you do have to be proactive in that
right.
role.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of your interests outside of the MPN world.
So, well, I mean, again, this is part of being proactive. So I try and if the rest of me is healthy, then I figure, I guess they call them comorbidities, right? So things like, I don't smoke, and I keep physically active even though I'm very tired or my bones ache or something. I run, I walk, I kayak, I do a lot of hiking, and so I just sometimes it's hard to get off the sofa, but once I get going, I feel better. Do some yoga or something along that line. So that just keeps me, again, if the rest of me stays as healthy as it can be, especially as I get older, because I've hit 60. So all of a sudden that puts you in the MPN world as high risk. It's like, really now? So, I watch, keep my blood pressure down and watch what I eat and try and get exercise. So
I want to go back to one of your earlier comments. I appreciate you mentioning pvreporter.com.
mm-hmm.
We've actually just rolled out a brand new website a couple days ago. So the original website that I created back in August of 2013 has been totally revamped by a professional. So we've got a nice, fresh, new look out there, and some new things that are on the way that I'm excited about. So yeah, just Diane, I want to thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's, I really just think that, again, if there's anything that I would want to emphasize, it's being proactive about your own health and your own knowledge. The more that you know, the more you can make good decisions, because often now the decisions are up to the patients. You have choices. Sometimes you do. Often you do. And I just think being educated is the best way to at least help you make that decisions that you need to make about your life.
Excellent. Thank you for leaving us on the positive note message. And really thank everybody, you guys, for watching, and look forward to more patient interviews in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.